say sort of we're doing the best we can, what is coming out well as far as the best we can? Like, what about the PGR is so good and accurate that you're proud to present it every year?
What is good and accurate about that?
Now, if you don't respond quickly, this looks kind of bad.
Yeah. Yeah, that is true.
Today, I'm joined by SaveAsUntitled, a well-known tournament organizer and panelist for the PGR ranking, to hopefully learn about what goes into PGR and both its negatives and positives. How you doing today, man?
Good. Excited to play some Melee instead of watch it for a change.
True, yeah. Do you not do net play or anything like that?
I try to net play a bunch, but the way I talk about it is that like my 9 to 5 is doing Melee content. So it's like working somewhere and then going home and doing that work again. Like as much as I love Melee, it can be a little grating to try to play Melee after like streaming or watching it for 6 hours straight.
Right.
I still do love the game.
Fair enough. So basically, I've talked to a bunch of top 100 players and a couple not top 100 players in the interest of learning everything I can about PGR. So I've gotten some, case studies to look at. I've gotten some interesting things about the thing, and then some sort of general questions to just hopefully, like, in a 10-15 minute video, someone can watch this and basically understand at a basic level the entirety of the PGR process and how it works. So, first question. The first thing I want to ask, as sort of like a general layout question, how do you go from a list of tournament results from a given year to an organized list of 100 players by skill? And like in like a basic sense, as like a list of steps, sort of. So like you get the list. Do you say start from the bottom, like start from the top, start with things that are obvious and fill in holes? Like what's like a general idea of the process, at least for you?
Yeah, for me personally, once I get the list, I usually like to just go through everyone. A lot of the times starting with like the easier ones to put in. Like probably before I start my list by the top 100, I have a general idea of what my top 10 looks like besides like a handful of players or like a couple of the big arguments like I'm trying to think of the 3. It was like Zane Axe Wizzy, I think, from last year's like top 100. That was like the big discussion within there. But a lot of times it's like very small things within the top, but it's like sorting them into like smaller groups of like stretches of 10, 15, 20. And then going back and looking at their individual stats further. And that's pretty much it. And I usually start from 1 and go all the way up to 100, because once you get around the changes from the year, last year it was really rough with how few events and other issues causing stuff to happen. That's not the right punish. But once you get to like 60 plus, it's usually a kind of, for lack of a better term, a shit show of ranking people.
Right.
But
I imagine with everyone's placement so close, it probably becomes difficult at that point.
Yeah, but to synthesize that down to a much shorter, less rambly thing, get the players, sort them into smaller groups, organize those smaller groups, make sure everything's good in there, and then usually go through back a couple of times, see if anything looks weird or off, and then like submit my ballot.
All right, so I've talked to quite a few PGR players while doing the top 100 countdown series, and something that comes up often, obviously, because like you said, no one can be happy with rankings, is the fairness and the accuracy of PGR. Obviously, you're only one panelist for one region, but how accurate overall do you think the rating that comes out at the end of the year ends up being? Like, if you look at the list of top 100 players, how often do you see things that to you are inaccuracies?
I think generally for what we're asking for, it's good enough. It's not like, I don't want to say that rankings don't matter, because rankings definitely do matter for people getting sponsorships and all that. But I think given what we have, the grassroots community, I think it's definitely close to the best thing we can do, especially with it being, like I said before, such a thankless job. Like all these people are volunteering tens of 20s of 30s of hours to put these lists together. And then also, like you kind of alluded to, people are lambasting them all over Twitter during and after ranking season for being like, why would you put this person there? Like I had a point last year where someone posted my unfinished, like part of my unfinished list on Twitter on Reddit. And I like didn't even like tag me. Someone saw like randomly put it in a post, and there was just so many comments there just complaining about how garbage it was. And it was like an unfinished list that I didn't even post myself. Like someone was sharing this without my own volition. I was like, but I think the list honestly does a great job.
All right. So I know, for example, and this is basically just talking about what you just talked about, you made a resume review of Sunsei, and based on your actual own assessments during the resume review, you actually predicted him into the 70s and 80s, but he ended up being at 98th, only barely making the top 100. So what do you think is the disconnect between your original idea of where he would end up and where he actually ended up? And you said you actually placed him 101 in your personal rankings. So how did you go from a video on YouTube reviewing his resume where you're putting him in the 80s and 70s to ending up putting him at 101st?
I remember particularly, and that was for some interesting strings of gameplay right there. But I remember for that, personally, the resume reviews also is a very new thing of just looking at one individual player's results and trying to like glean where they might end off there is kind of shows how difficult it can be to place that, even though I'm the exact same person, like weeks apart ranking the same person, that I was completely different on where I put Sunsei. And I think for him in particular, that was a large part due to the fact that I didn't realize how the other people around him's resumes would stack up. And then also when you're talking about a player from outside the US, it can get a little finicky about how those rankings work, because you have to give some sort of, what's the word I'm looking for? You have to give a little bit of extra for a player like Amsa or Sunsei, who inherently, because of that monetary barrier to entering tournaments, is going to be able to enter less tournaments because they're not located close to them. So I think a bunch of those factors for Sunsei is kind of what added up to making his ranking change so wildly. And again, like going back to saying that the last portion of the list can be really, really difficult. What was I gonna say? Oh god, sorry. Trying to give a concise answer and play melee and not give an SP is surprisingly...
That's the fun of the format.
Yeah, I think I just lost my I was thinking too much about neutral and I lost my train of thought. Yeah. But I don't think it's too wild to have someone change. If Sunsei's ranking went from like, this person's going to be 30th best in the world, and then they didn't end up making my top 100, I think I would definitely be doing something incredibly wrong there. But I think 70 to like 101 or 70 to 98 is not that crazy of a jump. With all the different things, even on like different days that you can value, like peaks versus consistency is the big discussion. But like anything that you can differently value at different points when analyzing players.
Right. So you actually talked a little bit about this. You're actually sort of predicting my questions here. I can tell you've been criticized before. We'll say that. So another thing that I've heard quite a bit when talking to non-US players is that they feel that there's an unconscious bias towards US players because you see them more. Now, I know that you said that you do try and like consider, the monetary barrier to entering tournaments for non-US players, but do you think that still overall Canadian or European players are at a disadvantage just as far as being ranked?
Oh, I'd say 100%. There's that. Okay, give me. Oh, well, I guess I don't really have to think too much about it.
Yeah, I'm pretty high percent. You're fine.
I don't think. I think there's definitely bias, and even as much as people ranking try to correct that and try to be aware of it, it's still hard to not do that, because there could be a player that is playing at a top 100 skill level outside the US, but just because they don't have, even though we're still kind of trying to fill in those gaps, a player like, say, Solo Battle, who had that one really sick tournament, the Finnish Jigglypuff, beat like Triff. I want to say they beat like Triff, Sechi. Oh my god, I'm gonna lose.
That was kind of nasty, by the way.
It was kind of sick. All right, but even if there is this player who's taking top 100 wins against the only top 100 players they really can without traveling, there's still nothing that can be done about it if they only have like 1 or 2 results over there, because we don't have those connective tissues to compare them. Even if it's like, hey, we have solo battle who beat this great European player, who this great European player was ranked like 40th or something from this ranking that include US players with them going to US events. It's still pretty much impossible to get a good read on where a European Canadian outside of the main region player, and that's kind of inherent problem that exists with a game like Melee, trying to do a ranking with a game like Melee, because there's no circuit, well, I guess there was, but RIP. There's no like events that everyone goes to. You kind of have to. There's a certain level of filling in the gaps that every panelist has to do to a varying degree for every single player. Sometimes it's bigger than others with like players outside of regions or players not attending a lot. But that's why I think ranking and talking about rankings is so interesting, because there's so much wiggle room. There's very few things that are objectively correct in rankings.
All right. So now that we've talked about, I'll stop asking about, mostly the faults of PGR. I want your perspective on basically the upsides. So you say sort of we're doing the best we can. What is coming out well as far as the best we can? Like, what about the PGR is so good and accurate that you're proud to present it every year?
What is good and accurate about that?
Now, if you don't respond quickly, this looks kind of bad.
Yeah, that is true. I feel like that's such a much more difficult question to answer, because I spend so much time, and a lot of the discourse around it is spending so much time defending or like being on the back foot. Like very rarely have people coming up and be like, wow, I love that this person was ranked here. This makes me super happy that this person was ranked here. It sounds pretty grim. As much as I do love the whole process of talking about rankings and stuff like that, and even though I think the combative nature and like the gray area and the no concrete part of it is what I think makes it beautiful, is that depending on what you value more with all these moving pieces, it's able to. There's no legitimately correct ranking. There's so many. As long as you have a reasonable explanation on why you have that. That's why I always say in the comments for any videos I do on rankings, like, feel free to disagree with what my opinion is on here, as long as you have like sound reasoning or like something behind why you think that a player X should be above player Y. Like that's cool. So I guess you could say that the thing that makes me happy about it is that there's still a lot of players. There's still a lot of general consensus from the variety of viewpoints that come from the community of like where generally people are.
All right, so I have one more question. And this is for anyone trying to get ranked, trying to get higher, whatever. What is the single most important thing to achieve in the ranked year in order to be considered for the top 100? So should they be focusing on doing okay at, say, majors, winning a ton of like locals that they can win, getting just high profile wins, not losing to people below them? Like, which would you say, when you see a lot of that thing on someone's resume, you're impressed and more likely to rate them?
Circling back to what I said before, is that I don't think it's ever a negative to attend more events. Okay? You're not going to be penalized heavily for getting like second at a local or having an off day at a local or playing secondaries at a local. Like it's always better to attend more events, I think, is with the caveat that you're financially and you have the time and financial ability to do so. Like,
gotcha. All right, well, that is all the questions I have for you. So let's focus for the last 2 stocks.
All right. Oh no.
Shitty.
This is gonna, if you beat me on the one where we're focusing on, it's gonna look real bad. Be like, oh yeah, if he didn't have to ask all those questions, he'd be kicking Save's ass.
I ain't doing. The only reason it's even close is because you're having to give these long-winded responses to questions, and I just get to sit back and listen. I'm basically listening to music right now, just like listening to your thoughts on things, and then follow-up questioning. You've definitely had an easier or a harder time here with the playing. It is an interesting format. I think everyone has difficulty with it just because of the nature of it. I mean, just playing and talking is difficult. in general.
Sure.
I think the very first top 100 video I did was with Sunsei, and we were doing advice by stock. So every time he took a stock, he would give me some advice on what to do better. And the first advice on the first stock that he killed me, I said, "What did I do wrong on that stock?" And he said, "You were talking." So it's definitely true, you know. Does not help.
It definitely playing Melee takes so much brain capacity because there's so many little minute things, and what makes the game so sick.
Right. All right. Well, thank you for joining me. It is your time to talk about what you've got. Everything you say will be linked in the description. If people somehow already don't know who you are, tell them where to go.
All right. Yeah. I was a Melee content creator. I guess now I'm a Melee tournament streamer. I'd say the best place to follow me to figure out what new endeavor I've got myself into is over on Twitter. I'm at SaveAsUntitled on pretty much every social media. If you go on Google, type in SaveAsUntitled, the first like 4 pages of results are my accounts on various websites. Go check that out. If you're on the East Coast, West Coast, or in Europe, sign up for Untitled. Yeah, I want to thank you for having me. Hopefully some of my answers were coherent. I feel like I get a little rambly sometimes, especially when I'm trying to play Melee as well. So
listen,
hopefully
every person I talk to has been somewhat rambly, but the beauty of it is the video is going to end up 15 minutes or less. You talked for 30 minutes. So if you imagine 50% of your rambly parts are being cut out in post, you know, that's a pretty coherent interview and answers.